Welcome to the Intrinsically Ordered podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the question, are gay men allowed to become priests within the Catholic Church? You may have heard about this Italian bishops' conference saying that gay men can become priests, which you might have heard is different than before. We're going to be diving into that controversy. We're going to go into what the church has historically said on this issue and why all of this points towards conversion therapy and young men being harmed by rectors who have wildly different interpretations of this central issue. If you're not particularly familiar with this issue within the church, about half of the clergy across the Western world is gay. Most priests are not straight. So this is a big question that rectors deal with. It's a big question that young men discerning deal with. And so today I'm joined by Colin and Ben to talk about this. We're all gay men who are ex-Catholics. I was radicalized as a teenager online, went deep down the rabbit hole and was discerning to become a Carmelite monk. And as soon as they figured out that I had same-sex attraction, even though I was perfectly celibate, perfectly in line with church teaching, I was told that I don't have a vocation, should never apply again. And we'll do quick intros by Colin and Ben, kind of your backstories and why people should actually listen to a bunch of people on the internet talking about this.
Yeah, I grew up in a very traditionalist Catholic community run by the FSSP, which is a Latin Mass order within the church. Growing up, I was never attempting to discern a vocation. I pretty much didn't think I was good enough as a person to do that growing up. But it was very much the teaching that was taught to us that basically if you had, as they called it, same-sex attraction, then that sort of was a de facto sign that you did not have a vocation and that you were not compatible with the priesthood.
And Ben, what's going to be your backstory?
So I grew up Catholic, and I was taught by the Dominican Sisters of St. Cecilia, which are kind of they're pretty traditional, but not full FSSP religious order. So they're very strict Thomists and very, very smart ladies. And so from a very young age, I knew that I wanted to enter religious life of some kind. I knew that I wasn't supposed to be a diocesan priest, but I just felt very called to certain types of religious life. I actually was discerning with the same community that you were for a while, before I knew that they were a little too strict. And then once I realized that they wouldn't accept me, I was quite devastated. And that's just a part of my story, but that's generally my,
Yeah. And this is an issue for people listening that is complex. There are documents out there and everybody thinks they know what the documents say. Everybody thinks that their interpretation is what the Vatican intended. And so as you dive into this issue, can gay men become priests? You're going to hear a lot of people saying a lot of different things using the same exact documents. So perhaps a central thesis of this, as ex-Catholics who have both lived through this experience and also read all of the documents, we're going to be reading the documents and showing our interpretations of them. But keep in mind that you will hear different interpretations. But the central issue here is the church knows that there are a lot of varied ideas of what this means, and that individual dioceses, individual religious orders have wildly different interpretations. And what that means is a particular rector, a particular person in charge of people becoming priests can make up their own interpretation, send people to conversion therapy, discriminate against people, or accept people, or break the Vatican rules. There's such a varied thing here. And that discrepancy, that gray area can be weaponized to harm people. And so we'll be going through all these documents. This is an issue that I think we've all well researched. And it's something that tens of thousands of men have gone through. And maybe if one of you two want to kind of talk about what the Italian Bishops' Conference is reported to have said, and then kind of the central issue buried at the very end of the document.
Do you want me to go? So what all the headlines are saying are basically like, gay men are allowed to be priests. And it's basically every headline except like LifeSite News, which is like, this is BS. And just now, some articles from more traditional sites are starting to come out saying like, actually, this is fake news. And it is. They're actually right. It is fake news that gay men are suddenly allowed to be priests. This document is just a reiteration of what we're about to look at, which is the 2005 document by Benedict XVI, which forbids effectively homosexual men from priesthood, and by extension, religious life in a lot of cases as well. So this document, we had one of our lovely mutual friends who knows Italian translate part of this. There's only one really small section that talks about considerations for homosexual persons into diocesan priesthood, and it's what everybody kind of grabbed onto. And this is kind of the effective translation. Let me get to a better. So it's only in Italian, so our friend was kind enough to translate it. In relationship to persons with homosexual tendencies who find themselves in seminaries or who discover during the time of formation that they are in such a situation, in accordance with the same magisterium of the Church and respecting profoundly these persons in question, it is not possible to admit to seminary or to sacred orders those who practice homosexuality, present homosexual tendencies that are deeply rooted, or who support the so-called gay culture. And then there's a quote, in the formation process, when reference is made to homosexual tendencies, it is important not to reduce discernment to this aspect only, but as it is with every candidate, it is important to recognize the significance of the global picture of the personality of the young person, so that recognizing themselves and integrating the same objectives of human and priestly vocation embrace it in general harmony. Which is, again, just a reiteration of the 2005 document that we're about to read.
I will say, to give credit, I guess, a lot of the actual statement in Italian does go on to talk about how the inherent dignity of homosexual persons is important and you shouldn't discriminate and all of that, which is sort of, I think, why it got picked up the way it did by the news. There's this common approach to coverage of things that Pope Francis will say or documents that are released where they mistake sort of charitable pastoral language towards accepting the dignity of human people as sort of being somehow inherently pro-gay in the sense of accepting gay people's rights and desires to be fully equal in the eyes of the law and in all matters that the Church still does not actually think they should be.
And that's probably our first pit stop here for the outside world looking in, is that the Catholic Church has very precise language that then gets kind of reported on as meaning a very different thing to the outside world. So, for example, the Church almost never uses the term gay or bi or lesbian or transgender in any official documents, because as they approach the issue, you can't be gay. You are a beloved child of the Father who experiences same-sex attraction or some form of saying gender incongruity or gender dysphoria or not feeling at home in your own body, or even more disgusting ways of phrasing it. And so when they say things like homosexual person, they'll both say that and also say you can't say that. They'll say men who experience same-sex attraction. They'll talk about those who practice homosexuality. And so when you're reading these documents, you have to be very precise on what the words mean, because they like to say men who experience same-sex attraction deserve dignity, they deserve respect, or even this term discrimination. The Catechism talks about how you're not allowed to discriminate or unjustly discriminate against gay people, except you can discriminate in terms of denying them marriage, in terms of denying them familial rights, in terms of denying them adoption, and also in terms of denying them admittance to seminary to be part of the community. So you have to be very careful about what language they're actually using. And then kind of pit stop 2 in all of this is like same-sex attraction, or as the culture would say, as gay, isn't precise enough for them. They then take that precise term and split into 2 terms, which is transitory same-sex attraction and deep-seated same-sex attraction or deep-seated homosexual tendencies. Does one of you two want to walk us through what kind of those terms mean and how the Church understands them?
Well, I think first it might be helpful to look at the actual document this report is referencing, and that sort of all the discussions about ordination of gay people to the priesthood sort of comes back to, which is this released from the Vatican, which is, as I love their long names, Instruction Concerning the Criteria for the Discernment of Vocations with Regard to Persons with Homosexual Tendencies in View of Their Admission to the Seminary and to Holy Orders, which was released, I believe it was the Dicastery for the clergy. So,
Congregation for Catholic Education.
There you go. If you scroll up a little bit, Cade, a little more. Okay. So, as you can see here, the main question of this is whether or not they want to admit to the seminary and to holy orders, which is priesthood, candidates who have deep-seated homosexual tendencies. They go on to say that the tradition is that gay acts are wrong. See, regarding acts, it teaches that the sacred scripture presents them as grave sins. The tradition is constantly required consider them as intrinsically immoral and contrary to natural law. And so, obviously, they condemn all acts of homosexuality, which is just gay sex acts. The question then becomes about tendencies. And they're very careful to say here, deep-seated homosexual tendencies. One must in no way overlook the negative consequences that can derive from the ordination of persons with deep-seated homosexual tendencies. Right underneath that, however, they present some sort of contrast. Different, however, would be the case in which one were dealing with homosexual tendencies that were only the expression of a transitory problem. For example, that of an adolescence not yet superseded. Nevertheless, such tendencies must be clearly overcome at least 3 years before ordination to the diaconate. Essentially, this is the question at issue. There's actually, if you could find there's a bit that talks about the three conditions that are a sort of a no-go for acceptance into holy orders. I believe it refers to this one right here. In the light of such teaching, the dicastery, in accordance with the Congregation for Divine Worship and the discipline of its sacraments, believes it necessary to state clearly that the Church, while profoundly respecting the persons in question, cannot admit to the seminary or to holy orders those who practice homosexuality, present deep-seated homosexual tendencies, or support the so-called gay culture. Such persons, in fact, find themselves in a situation that gravely hinders them from relating correctly to men and women. One must in no way overlook the negative consequences that can derive from the ordination of persons with deep-seated homosexual tendencies. So, and then it, like I said, it goes on to talk about the difference with transitory homosexual tendencies. So, essentially saying anyone with deep-seated homosexual tendencies is automatically not meant to be a candidate for priesthood. So the issue becomes, what do we mean when we say deep-seated homosexual tendencies versus transitory? If we're just reading those 3 paragraphs, you might get a very clear idea of what they mean, which is those who are consistently experiencing same-sex attraction or are consistently gay would have deep-seated homosexual tendencies, while those where it's just a phase or they grow out of it or their sexuality changes would be the more transitory version.
There's a few different camps in this. What does it mean to have deep-seated homosexual tendencies? Which probably our third step in looking at this entire issue is that the Catholic Church can't really admit that you being attracted to men isn't intrinsically ordered, is the language that they use, that it's okay, that it's not a defect. The church, and especially the more modern church, is always quick to say, well, being attracted to men isn't a sin. And you're like, cool. And so you think like, oh, they're just fine with you experiencing same-sex attraction. But we'll get into kind of later about how this, they can't really accept that it's just another attraction and it's neutral. But in this particular document, deep-seated homosexual tendencies, as Colin pointed out, a plain text reading would be, oh, somebody who exclusively is attracted to men, especially for a period of time. But there's a few different camps in this. And this phrase, when I was discerning, heard a multitude of different interpretations because it seems so obvious when you look at the document. Deep-seated homosexual tendencies cannot be admitted to the church. And somehow people spin this in a number of different camps. Ben, do you want to kind of walk through the different camps of interpretation around what deep-seated means?
So on one end of the spectrum, there's rectors and seminarians who read this and basically completely disregard it as like, well, as long as I'm celibate, it's fine. But that's clearly not what the document is saying. And a little bit to the left of that are like rectors, seminarians, theologians who interpret this as like, I don't know, in like the James Martin sort of way, where it's like, well, as long as it doesn't present a huge issue, like as long as you don't have, for example, a sex addiction that is directly ordered towards like other men, right? But then there's, on the other end, a very strict interpretation of this, which kind of seems to be the more widely accepted. Yeah, and also textual interpretation, which is that deep-seated means, it just means gay people. Like, that's just all it means. It just means it's a person who's exclusively attracted to other men. That's all it means. It doesn't mean... It's kind of almost a deceptive wording in that it's trying to present this as like there's a lot of people who are experiencing this transitory state, when it's anybody who's reading this document is reading it because they know they're exclusively attracted to men. So it's
I did actually want to talk about that a little bit, because I think it's something that as gay people, we've definitely all heard, but it's probably worth reminding people that one of the stereotypical things that you hear when you come out to someone who's not affirming is, oh, it's a phase. You'll grow out of it. It's these things happen when we're young and when we're confused about certain things, or you're just confused. It's not actually what you're feeling. And I think in the secular culture, there's sort of a knowledge that none of that's real. That's all just sort of wishful thinking on the part of a homophobic parent, usually. But I think within this religious context, they are very much operating in that space where they want to hold open the door of sexuality change without mandating it per se, but saying, hey, maybe it's possible for someone to change their sexuality, or maybe it's possible for this to just be a phase. And so, hey, the Lord works in mysterious ways, and we don't want to ever sort of declare what's the sort of plain reality of the situation as secular people understand it.
I see it almost as like they're about to walk you off of the plank, but right before they walk you off, there's a giant neon sign that says like escape chute. When it's tees up this like, if you really are gay, like you can't do it. But right before that is like, well, these transitory experiences doing this, like, is there like, are you sure you want to walk off the plank? There's this out right here. And this is another thing to add, especially for the outside world. This idea of your vocation or becoming a priest, what you do with your life in Catholic circles from the time you're 10 or so is all about trying to figure out your vocation in life, which is what is God calling you to. And unlike in maybe the mainstream Christian world where pastors are essentially normal Christians who studied a little bit and then have kind of just been appointed to be a church, they're more or less like dads with a lot of extra Bible studies that kind of administer a group. In the Catholic Church, your vocation is ordained by God, literally to use the term ordain in your ordination, and that state can't change. And that's in many ways the most important way in which you will get to go to heaven. And you, as a priest, you're not just a normal person who goes to school. You have this special mark in your soul. And so when you're a young person and everybody's talking about dating and marriage and becoming a monk or becoming a priest or going to seminary or whatever it is, it's like college decision day in elite high school on the max. And so when you are a young teenager looking at what are you going to do for the rest of your life, especially when you're in the closet, you're trying to hide the fact that you're in the closet, but you also kind of have this love of God and you see the priesthood and you want it out, and everybody's like trying to figure out what you're doing at 14. You're reading these documents and your heart's being ripped out by saying, even if you're in line with church teaching, even if you're more faithful than all of your straight counterparts, even if you're more chaste than all of your straight counterparts, even if you pray more and you give more to the homeless and you are more involved in the faith than anybody else out there, you've made bigger sacrifices, the church is still ripping away that opportunity to experience the life of being a priest. And priest holds these preeminent place in society. And so the people that are reading this document aren't well-formed 40-year-olds doing academic research. This is young teens who are dealing with self-worth issues in high-control religion, trying to have to figure out what they're going to do for the rest of their life at age 16, and trying to figure out these really, really complex documents. And this is why it's such a problem, is because everybody has a different interpretation. And like when I went to apply to become a monk, they just said straight up, you experience same-sex attraction. I wrote this beautiful essay about how much I love the Lord and how much I was sacrificing this thing. And they said, no, you don't have a vocation. Don't look here. Don't look anywhere else. Go get married even though you're attracted to men, and shut up. And then some people have a different experience where they go to the seminary, they pour their heart out. They might even come out for the first time to their rector, and they're accepted and they're loved and they're told that, yes, awesome, you can be a full participating member. And some people in the middle go and disclose all of this, and then they get sent to conversion therapy. So once again, the central thesis isn't that we have the perfect interpretation, is that there's a huge discrepancy of interpretations for people in really difficult situations at the whims of non-licensed people doing pseudo-psychology based off of shitty psychology. That's kind of like how we're going to tee all of that up.
I also want to sort of comment, earlier you mentioned that there's a disproportionately high number of priests that are gay. And I think it's worth sort of taking a second to appreciate why that might be in the Catholic space. Basically, piggybacking off of what you said about vocations and how important they are, to the young Catholic. If you're growing up Catholic and you're experiencing being gay and realizing, oh, marriage is not really an option for me for a vocation, and marriage is lauded as a very important vocation for a lot of people. Theology of the body is an incredibly influential set of doctrines and beliefs that is taught widely as a very central part of what it means to be Catholic. And that's all to do with sexuality, marriage, and compatibility, children, all that stuff. So as a gay person, this entire sort of window or sphere of Catholic life is sort of de facto closed to you. And given the importance of vocations, a single life where you as a man can lead a fulfilling single life and be important and respected and loved in the community is deeply, deeply attractive. And so there's a sort of natural tendency for gay men to want to become priests, because it almost seems like the glass slipper, for want of a better word. It's like you have this conundrum. I can't get married, and here comes this perfect. Well, it's also just a perfect vocation. Like here you're a guy and you can't get married. Well, do I have a pitch for you? But the Catholic Church, like you said, is not going to be allowing that so neatly. I just wanted to take a minute to sort of acknowledge why this is such a big issue.
To that point, it's not a dishonest thing where they secretly are going to, I just don't want to come out to anybody and I'm going to have all these crazy orgies and so I'm just going to become a priest to cover it up. Like you said, it's kind of this natural end of you realize in your indoctrinated into the church that sex is only for procreation and for bounding of the spouses in the sacrament of marriage, and that technically there's no impediment to you getting married in terms of like how the church sees it. But how do you court a woman and like on date 3 be like, so actually I'm not attracted to you and there's no romance really. Like we might be really good friends and we might be able to get the sex to work and actually create children, but we're more or less going to be platonic best friends who raise a family, which A, finding a woman who's okay with that, not great. B, taking the risk of telling a woman that in the context of dating, talk about Catholic gossip circles, and also just the danger of coming out to traditional Catholics, where the church officially says, no discrimination, this is bad, we should accept people. And then you look at, like, if you were to actually poll Catholics, their reaction to somebody disclosing same-sex attraction, not great. So you have the safety issue, you have the getting married issue, but then you have this love of the Lord, especially if you're a gay Catholic and you're like, I'm going to be celibate for the rest of my life. You've given that up. And all of a sudden, the idea of the priesthood isn't out of the question. And gay Catholics are disproportionately holy in terms of the number of rosaries that they say and daily masses that they go to and reading of the books. Because I remember as soon as like dating in high school was off the table as I became Catholic, it's like, what else am I going to do with this thing? I'm going to study it. I'm going to research it. I'm going to try to bring as many people into the faith. Like you have so much time as a high schooler when you're not talking about dating women. And so you grow to love the Lord. You see that becoming a priest or a monk or a brother or whatever it is. It's kind of this holy state. And so you're like, awesome, I love the Lord. Marriage, probably not there, but the priesthood sounds amazing. And I'm giving so much up for the church already. I love this thing. And even though I think Colin, Ben, and I wouldn't encourage anybody to become a Catholic priest, there's this element of discrimination in that as soon as you want to be an active participating member of your community, you have this thing out of your control that you are shamed for, that options are off of the table. And now when marriage and becoming a priest are off of the table, and depending on who you talk to, the single life also isn't a valid way to spend your life. The option is like, if I can't spend, if the only options in which I can spend my life are these 3 things, and they're off the table, you kind of walk yourself off of the cliff in terms of wanting to live anymore, for lack of a better term, because you can't do anything laudable in your group. You can't do anything that will give you acceptance. You can't be right in any way, because even in those 3 vocations, you're going to go wrong. Fake marriage, fake priest, or fake single vocation. So that's why you kind of back them into a table. And so our issue isn't that like everybody should become Catholic priests, and it's the most amazing thing, but is that the discrimination of people who want to be part of their own communities isn't allowed. Even if they are the top tier, they are the people who pray the most in the parish, they've given the most up, it is still off of the table, depending on who you talk to. And so that'll kind of get us into this next thing, this language of transitory and deep-seated homosexual attractions. In 2005, from what the research that we've done and the people that we've talked to, comes from 2 kind of psychologists who, for lack of a better term, invented these labels, because this isn't the DSM. This isn't in mainstream psychological journals, this term transitory and deep-seated homosexual tendencies. So I'm going to share my screen here and kind of go through a seminal document in the church's particular parlance around this option or around this thing. And Ben, do you want to introduce us to kind of what this paper is and the psychologists that are kind of behind this invention of language in a certain sense?
So both of these guys work for Catholic Answers. And yes, Peter Klaponis, he does a lot of work with like freeing men from pornography. That's kind of his big thing. And Richard Fitzgibbons does a lot with he did actually quite a bit with NARTH, which is the conversion therapy organization, the alleged conversion therapy organization. I should state.
I was going to say our disclaimer for all of this, especially as we get into documents, is that we haven't contacted these people. We don't have any non-public information. None of us are licensed psychologists, but we do have our eyes and a hell of a lot of opinions. So everything that we're about to say reading through this document, we're not licensed. We're not making big legal claims. This is our interpretations of what we think is absolute bullshit. So that's our disclaimer.
Do you think you could explain for people who might not know what NARTH is? Because it's such a niche Catholic thing. So people who aren't aware might need to be told.
So NARTH is the basically the original organization that developed after homosexuality was removed from the DSM as a mental disorder. In response to that, this group of physicians and therapists and psychologists made this rather small group to try to explore alternatives to just the acceptance model of homosexuality. Not all of them wanted it, because NARTH doesn't exist anymore. Not all of them wanted to repathologize homosexuality. A lot of them just wanted to explore the concept of therapeutic choice, which basically is to say, like, we want to be able to give therapies to people who don't want their homosexual attractions, which is conversion therapy. Like, sorry, it's conversion therapy.
I like the term change allowing therapy, which is the amazing double speak for
exploratory.
Therapy. Yeah.
Exploratory, yeah. You might hear reparative therapy, which was also connected, right? Wasn't
allegedly,
and reintegrative therapy are kind of terms that you'll have floated around of change allowing therapy, exploring these attractions, reintegrative therapy, and reparative therapy, which are trademark terms, and they're a very specific type of therapy. So there's a whole world.
They would all fall under the umbrella of alternatives to the acceptance model of homosexuality,
Which is to say, which is our opinion, which is it is my opinion that all of these are kind of lumped under the conversion therapy label, because at their core, what they're saying is that being gay, so experiencing same-sex attraction, isn't, like, it might not be sinful, but it's not good. It's not neutral in the same way that there's therapies for men who have sex addictions to the opposite sex, but that initial orientation towards women isn't contested. It's not shamed. It's not seen as bad. Just kind of like the end of, like, well, prostitutes or pornography, as they see as a huge problem, are kind of the issue. But on the gay issue, in kind of like the Catholic psychological or pseudo-psychological world, that entire orientation, the problem isn't just the porn or just the hookups or just acting out on those tendencies. It's that entire orientation is towards the wrong thing, because it can't naturally be fulfilled under natural law. So it's disoriented. And Catholic apologists, especially those who are first getting in, love to say being gay isn't a sin, just like acting on it's a sin. And then as you start reading, as you start getting deeper into this issue, that attraction is always paired with negative language, negative connotations, shame. And so that attraction isn't seen as you're going to hell for it, but it's seen, at least what I felt, is that it's seen as something shameful or something that can be fixed. And so this whole,
I can give you a sort of proof text of that. In the Vatican document that we started referencing, there's the sentence, such persons, meaning those with deep-seated homosexual tendencies, in fact find themselves in a situation that gravely hinders them from relating correctly to men and women. One must in no way overlook the negative consequences that can derive from the ordination of persons with deep-seated homosexual tendencies. It's not just, oh, it's okay to be gay, just be celibate, you're called. No, you are unable to correctly relate to both men and women. Yes, this is not necessarily your fault. They're not blaming you for these attractions, but they are saying that you must accept that these attractions are inherently disordered as is the catechism's language, intrinsically disordered, hence the name of the podcast.
Yes. Yes. For all of you theology nerds, that's where all of this terminology for the podcast name comes from. And Catholics, especially those who are on the more liberal or mainstream approach, they're going to hear all of this that we're talking about of, I've never heard Father Jim Bob from down the street say that being attracted to men is wrong. I've never heard my radio show host or my Instagram Catholic influencer say it. And I've actually heard the opposite. I've heard from Catholic answers that it's okay to have these attractions. I've heard from so-and-so, or I was at a retreat and Father so-and-so said that the attractions are fine and those people need to be treated with respect and dignity. And if you are a straight Catholic who's never delved into these issues and you kind of go like, awesome, and then you go about living your daily life, it's a different story when you are a gay Catholic and you're reading all the books on this issue, because all these Catholics love to say that like being gay isn't your identity, it's just your experience. But this, in a roundabout way, becomes integral to your identity as a Catholic, because you can't just live life and sacrifice in marriage and have kids and raise a family and be part of the community. That your experience is an integral lens through which you have to view the rest of your life as a Catholic. And so the question's like, what do I do about this? That's when you start reading the books and the influences and the speakers and the documents and dredging up all of this stuff that most Catholics have never seen in their entire life. And most of these documents, if you are a straight Catholic, you've probably never seen any of these documents before. And so if somebody's wanting to object to that, all these documents are real. And not only like this is a Vatican document, but what we're about to bring up in this study and in other vocational settings, even though they're not part of the church's dogmatically defined things, that in a certain sense, an apologist might say they're optional, they're nonetheless integral for many gay Catholics' experience. And if you've had a different experience, that is awesome. If you've only heard good things, awesome. But these documents, they're real. They're things that objectively have caused shame to gay Catholics. And I'll bring this study back up. And this study is published 2011. But these two psychologists, as Ben mentioned, have been kind of in the field for a long time. And this is our understanding that these two are integral for adoption of that language. And in the abstract of answering this question of like the distinctions between deep-seated homosexual tendencies and transitory same-sex attractions in candidates for seminary religious life, the abstract, the first 4 words, the sexual abuse crisis. It's not the Jason Everett approach of like, we just need to love the gays. That doesn't start up. The sexual abuse crisis. And then it goes on to say, in the church, in which the primary victims were adolescent males, highlights the importance of the 2005 document from the Vatican's Congregation for Catholic Education on the selection of candidates for priesthood and religious life in regards to homosexuality. So these people they're not Vatican officials, they're not speaking ex cathedra here, but what people are reading when they look into this issue is the sexual abuse crisis, relating it to the 2005 document that everybody's referencing, and at the heart of this issue, it being the homosexuals.
I also want to just why this specific document is something we're looking at. If you scroll up a little bit, Mr. Fitzgibbon's down a little bit more. You get the little summary of both of them. If you look at Fitzgibbon's summary, he is a consultant to the Congregation for the Clergy at the Vatican. He's attempting to take what was stated in the 2005 document, the sort of distinction between deep-seated and transitory attractions, and sort of take the time to really get into what that means and explain it. His opinion on these things is material to what was intended by that original document. So while this might not be the official word of the church, this is not something, this particular sort of article is not something that Catholics necessarily all read or have to believe or something. It is emblematic of the thinking behind the people who wrote the 2005 document and what they were trying to get across by distinguishing.
And the ongoing interpretation of it, in that the documents from 2005, and there hasn't been quite an official document that clarifies. And you'd think if half of the clerics in, let's say, the world have gone through this issue and the church knows there's huge discrepancy, they've never issued a clarification. And so by virtue of them neglecting, the church neglecting, clarifying these major questions, the church is aware that there's gray area and they're fine with there being gray area. And these particular interpretations with prominent people who have influence, they know that this is happening. They're okay with this critique, because if people, big Catholic influencers in this space, said something absolutely against what the Vatican says, they would have issued something that clarifies. And so my opinion is that because they know what's being said and they haven't clarified anything since, and it's a big enough issue that they know about it, that in some way this could be an orthodox interpretation. And the very least, in my experience, what we're about to read through is exactly what I've heard verbatim from clerics, from folks at various seminaries, from lay Catholics, from YouTubers online. And I think the other two can attest, after having read articles and YouTube videos and gone deep into this thing, that even though this document isn't from the Vatican, it is emblematic of the thinking that's out there. And even if it's wrong according to your standards as the Catholic who magically knows the correct interpretation, this thinking is what's causing harm. So all to say, this document is not officially authoritative, but it is a great cross-section of what the problem that we're talking about within the church.
And I should add, this document exists to clarify that statement in the 2005 document. It exists for that reason. So,
it's not a church document, but it's pretty close. It's the guy who helped write the document saying, "Here's what I meant when I we said
I don't know. I don't know if he was actually writing the document, but I know that he is he's consulting with the Vatican's clergy committee. Like that's what he's been doing for many years. So
you want to read the
one
second
can only
half
assume.
of the abstract? Yeah. Ben, you want to kind of walk us through this document. You've read the most, to the second half of this abstract, and then we'll scroll through and pull out some crazy phrases from this and get into it, because this document is terrible.
Yeah. So this notion that a relationship with the same sex family member or friends is the determining factor in developing homosexuality has been discredited for literally maybe decades at this point. This is not a real thing. It's just not. Of course,
for context,
Go ahead.
because we do have audio-only listeners. We should probably read through the sentence just so they know what we're talking about.
Yeah, do you want to read it?
Yeah,
Go
I'll
ahead.
go for it. So they say a thorough, in-depth clinical interview that focuses on masculine identity and an evaluation of the development of a positive masculine identity through secure attachment relationships with a father, male peers, and a brother, as well as a positive body image and thorough psychological testing, can distinguish clearly between deep-seated homosexual tendencies and transitory same-sex attractions in candidates for priesthood, which, because of the first sentence, they're saying is an important skill to have because of the sexual abuse crisis, sort of implicitly saying that the sex abuse crisis is caused by all these gay priests that we're letting slip through the cracks.
It says in the next paragraph, the implementation of this Vatican document is important in the protection of minors from sexual abuse and of the church from further shame and sorrow. And so this is what we're talking about, where when you first hear church teaching, it's like, oh, being attracted to men is okay. And then you look at the official documents and the interpretations of those official documents, and homosexuality is always grouped into sex abuse. It's immediately paired with pedophilia. It's immediately associated with being a bad child, with not having great role models with your father, with not having great male friends, with having body image issues. It's not seen as a neutral thing because it's always paired with other negative language
and being sexually abused. That's a big one too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they can't accept, in a certain sense, the church can't accept that being attracted to men is just another normal variation of human sexuality. Because then it would be like, oh, if somebody's naturally ordered towards men and two consenting adults, like they might not be able to have babies in the way that straight couples can, but they have to keep this door open that like being gay isn't okay because it's not part of God's plan. And the entire sex abuse crisis from in the church is not about gay men having consenting relationships with other men. It's not about gay marriage. It's not about trans issues. It's nothing that follows under the LGBT umbrella. All they're doing is lumping in, oh, some of the children that were abused were males. Awesome, let's blame the gays. Two different distinct camps. It is disingenuous, it is incorrect, and it is absolutely appalling for these things to be lumped in, especially in the abstract. Like, this is the one-liner thing to start with those four words.
The first sentence.
First sentence.
Yep.
Like,
and even right into the introduction as well. Like it sort of reiterates it all.
Once, the introduction, the first four words, the sexual abuse crisis. So the abstract and the introduction about homosexuals is always about the abuse crisis, because they can't accept the fact that they allowed predator priests to abuse children. They covered up and they don't care, and there's still an ongoing crisis. So they need a scapegoat, which in this case is the entire gay community. And And so they also,
you can actually see what you were talking about, this sort of language around not viewing homosexuality as just sort of a different expression. If you look at the first paragraph of the deep-seated homosexual tendencies section, it describes what they mean, and they'll say those with deep-seated homosexual tendencies often identify themselves as gay men, which is based to a large extent upon their sexual attractions. They often reject the current scientific findings that there is no genetic or biological basis for SSA and believe they were born this way. I should clarify. All of the scientific claims made in this article are extremely dubious, including this one. They do not view homosexuality as a disordered inclination, are comfortable with their sexual attractions, and subscribe to the increasingly prevalent belief that homosexuality is a normal variation in human sexuality and think there is nothing wrong with homosexual acts. Their beliefs make them highly vulnerable to sexual acting out.
These are all mutually exclusive. Like, I remember when I was Catholic and I was discerning and I was really trying to figure all of this out for myself, I didn't think that my attractions were ordered or good, but the attractions were exclusive to men. So it's lumping all of these things together as like, well, people with deep-seated attractions, they identify as gay, and it's like that's not true for everybody, and that's not like a consistent picture, because I was still considered deeply seated despite almost having nothing in common with that. Like, I didn't call myself gay. I didn't identify with the homosexual culture. I was very faithful. I was celibate and chaste. And so I just find that so interesting that that's all lumped together as like one big thing, when it's very clear that like most gay Catholics who are faithful don't match most of that criteria, yet they are still considered deeply seated. So
I think it's actually interesting that you bring that up, because when they later get into defining the transitory gay experiences, I think the idea is that they want all Catholics who experience same-sex attraction to work to get rid of that as sort of a baseline, to work on overcoming it. Specifically the authors of this paper, they want that as the sort of, if you're a good Catholic, this is what you're going to try. So for them, they want to start the dichotomy as deep-seated means that you accept it and you don't try to change it. And if it's transitory, well, at least you're trying to get rid of it, you know?
Yeah.
And so
and that's where in Catholic documents around issues with sex addiction for straight people, they don't ever have a sentence like this. And this is on page 3, so just past the introduction. Men with deep-seated homosexual tendencies are usually unwilling to examine the possibility that they experience emotional conflicts in significant male relationships that resulted in same-sex attraction. And this is where, like, in psychology, there's this term like etiology, which is like the theory of how things come about, either in disease or in our brain or in mental illness. It's like, how did you become gay is essentially what they're trying to get at here. When asked, they are often unable to name a best male friend in elementary school. Their strong physical attraction to other men's bodies and to the masculinity of others is the result of profound weakness in male confidence, a craving for male acceptance, and poor body image. They have a significant affective immaturity with excessive anger and jealousy towards males who are not homosexual. Their insecurity leads them to avoid close friendships with other men who do not have same-sex attraction. And if there's a similar document about, let's say, porn addictions among straight men, they don't bring up etiology of how you got straight in the documents, right? They're not like, oh, that's weird that you're attracted to women on the internet. Let's examine, like, did you just have a bad relationship with your mom and that's why you like girls? Or, like, did you just not have any friends or acquaintances that were girls in high school? No, they're just like the end result of being attracted to women taken too far, and let's say spending all of your money on prostitutes. They have a problem with you losing your money and having sex outside of marriage, but that orientation, they don't do this same like, well, can you name a close male friend from elementary school? And maybe this is another pit stop, is that the gay male experience, especially even if we use the label queer, whether that's in terms of sexuality or gender identity, is so varied out there. That what they're operating off of is like a 1970s playgrounds pointing at the gay kid type of like stereotypes, when in reality, gay men or queer men or gender nonconforming folks, whatever we want to say, many have had close male friendships. Many have had exclusively female friendships. Some people have had a mix of both. Like when I was younger, I had pretty much only male friends and spent a lot of time with my dad. Some people have the opposite. And then there's also this kind of phrase out there that you'll hear a lot in the online Catholic conversion therapy world, which is like, I turned the exotic into the erotic, which means that you had there was a discrepancy or a distance between you and masculinity. And then as you grew up and hit puberty, those two things flip. And then you turn this like, I always wanted to be a cool guy and be strong and muscular, is the cause of being gay. And so if you could just really be masculine, if you could really have male friendships, if you could really feel comfortable in your own body, if you could stop looking at Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson posters, like, and look like him, you would be perfectly straight. And so a lot of this, like, this approach to psychology, and a lot of times this is done by unlicensed folks, that just like your random pastor at the rector seminary is like, so let's like make you more of a man, because if your sexuality and your manhood line up, the gay goes away. But if there's a difference between you and who you want to be, or who, whether it's in yourself, or you'll even see out there from prominent Catholic therapists on, there's a clip of Dr. Joseph Nicolosi Jr. who brings up this, I don't know if it's a real or an actor, talking about like what sort of man do you want to become? And then he contrasts that right before that with like, what would you want to see in a male partner? In my opinion, is that he's trying to line those two up to go, what you want in a partner is what you want in yourself. And so if you just get that in yourself, then you're not going to want a male partner. Yeah, that's my rant on this paragraph, let alone the next 17 pages.
I want to add a little thing there, that one of our mutual friends was expressing that like a lot of this conversion therapy type thing doesn't occur with licensed people. Actually, most of the time it occurs in spiritual direction or even in confession. And that's where it happened with me, is that my confessor and spiritual director was saying these sorts of things to me when I was 14. And I just believed him. And then later on, I looking back, I'm like, oh, that's where that like that's where that came from. It came from all of this stuff. And it's very sneaky. It's really sneaky how it kind of creeps into mainstream Catholic culture. And I think actually a lot of that is due to Courage, the organization Courage. But that's a tangent for another time.
I would say, yeah, it's sort of based off of what you guys were saying. Like, it's important to acknowledge that this discussion is specifically about like priests and priestly formation and who gets to be a priest and who doesn't. But the conversations around that are sort of bound up intrinsically in the conversations of what do you do with homosexuality across the board, even if you're not going to be a priest. Like, what is the correct Catholic approach supposed to be? And you'll find lots of therapists and a lot of the same people. Courage is an official apostolate of the church, correct? Like, it's an official arm of the church. The people who are writing this study, they're very intimately connected to the church's outreach towards gay people in general. So a lot of what they're saying about eligibility for priesthood and how to approach, gay attractions, even if you're not going to become a priest, like all of this stuff spreads outward. And correct. And yeah,
and it's in the zeitgeist, in that a lot of Catholics, when you talk to apologists, or if somebody makes a response video to this, they're going to do the whole like nailing these people down is like trying to nail Jello to a tree. In that, as soon as you bring up something like this document, and they'll say, wow, this is so terrible, but I love the fact that Father Mike Schmitz is so compassionate about this, and that's not in the official Vatican teaching. Except this approach to it is in the zeitgeist of Catholics, and that you will not go through your life as a gay Catholic not hearing these things. And so even though they're not official church teaching, they're what a majority of Catholics in the pews think. That's heavily reported that this is the approach that a lot of more official people within the church, including youth ministers and pastors and lay people that work within the church and rectors, that this is the approach that a lot of them take, and that this is what causes a lot of harm. And in a certain, I got a comment on my YouTube video the other day from a psychologist saying, I'm a Catholic psychologist, and every time I talk to a poor suffering gay person, they always say, I can always find childhood trauma or some issue with masculinity. And the thing is, like, it's unfalsifiable, because at some point, everybody had an issue with their body, with their role in society, with how they viewed themselves. That's a natural part of growing up. And so if you're looking for a natural part of growing up, you're going to find it, and then you're going to say, well, if we just resolve that, then we're going to be fine. And so whether you're hunting for repressed memories and inventing them, or you're trying to pinpoint being gay and living a perfectly happy, healthy, normal life on the fact that your friend in 6th grade was mean to you. Or later in here, they talk specifically about, we'll find the quote here, but they talk about not having great hand-eye coordination or good at sports. Like, these are some, in a culture that is great focus on sports, it is difficult for a boy to develop healthy male confidence if he does not participate in some athletic activity. So it goes through a number of these things. They use the term like ego dystonic, which is like, they're basically trying to say, like, you can be gay, but you don't have to act on it. Candidates with transitory same-sex attractions do not base their masculine identity upon their sexual attractions. While not understanding fully the origins of their same-sex attractions, they do not believe that they were born with them and greatly desire to overcome them. Usually they have not had a history of homosexual acting out. They accept the fullness of the church's teaching on sexual morality. So they're in this document, one interpretation is that transitory same-sex attractions, that your masculine identity isn't based on them, which essentially means you don't engage with them, you say that they're bad, and every time you kind of like pull the rubber band on your wrist and like, damn it, kids, stop being gay, is kind of the approach here that they're taking. In integral, these young men are highly motivated to work in psychotherapy to identify the origins of their conflict and to resolve them. The most common conflict identified that cause weakness in male confidence arises from the failure to develop close male friendships, especially in early childhood, most often because of a lack of hand-eye coordination that is necessary to participate in comfortably in baseball, basketball, soccer, football,
again,
gym activities.
No citation. Crazy.
And so they're setting up here is that transitory, and in one interpretation is if you're one of the good gays, you'll be open to going to conversion therapy. And in conversion therapy, you can call it whatever you want. This change allowing, your attractions are bad. And even a lot of these therapists will say, like, we're going to approach it with non-judgment. So that you can start thinking about it and then work the entire time about how the fact you don't want to have them. And these things, in our experience, have not worked. They're not proven to be reliable. There is some natural sexual fluidity out there in the world, but that's not happening in the lab. And that there is nobody that I've seen out there who is in the entire Catholic media space has gone from I'm entirely attracted to men to I'm entirely attracted to females. They'll say, God cured me of my homosexuality. And what they really mean is like they stopped doing Grindr hookups. Or they're like, and God have this more masculine identity, and so I don't crave attention in men, which still isn't being attracted to females. Or they'll say, and God showed me the beauty of authentic womanhood and the role it has in the family, which still isn't sexual attraction to women. They will have every phrase out there, and nobody that I've seen in the entire Catholic media sphere said, I was predominantly attracted to men sexually, and now I'm not tempted at all. I'm not tempted to act out, but like I don't even find that sexually arousing. And I find women in women's bodies predominantly the thing that I am attracted to. Nobody out there says it. They say some word salad that makes you think that they're straight or that they changed orientation or that they're happy now. But they will never say, I went from loving men in a romantic, in a sexual context to that doesn't weigh on me at all, even in daily life.
The only thing that I've slightly seen is people saying like, well, as long as I focus a lot on women, like specifically gay guys, like as long as I focus a lot on women, like I can kind of make it work. And I think that's, again, that was something that I was kind of told when I was young, is like replace the gay thoughts with straight ones, which again is like it's one of those tactics, but it's
I will also,
fascinating.
I do want to just confirm before we move on that like the transitory as opposed to deep-seated thing, in the first paragraph of the transitory same-sex attractions thing here, they say, although the use of the term transitory same-sex attractions is newer, we deem it preferable to the use of the older terms because it implies the ability to change, meaning that the only concrete difference between deep-seated and transitory attractions is that the transitory sexual attractions imply that the person is seeking to change them. And if you scroll down to the section that's the treatment of transitory same-sex attractions, it says, once transitory same-sex attractions are identified, treatment is recommended either prior to entering seminary or as a seminarian. The goal is to address the emotional conflicts that have been uncovered in the evaluation. Because if you'll remember in the actual Vatican document, let me look where it is. Give me one moment.
Because they give you 3 years is that you have to overcome your
Exactly.
homosexuality. And this is part of the, so many Catholics will report that their experience of being shipped off to what's effectively, in my opinion, conversion therapy, is that they give you this hope, that like they give you this ideology of like, and you can become straight. And then you read all these documents, and there is an infinite number of documents and blogs and people out there that are going to have you pseudo-psychologically analyze every male friendship and every sports team and every interaction with your father. And you are going to spend thousands of dollars paying somebody who to just go like, oh, and tell me about when you were 5. So you talked about October and Halloween. Tell me about Christmas of 5th grade Halloween now and how that relates to men. Go through your entire childhood. And this whole time you're looking like, I only need 3 years. I only need 3 years. I only need 3 years. And every day, like, you hope you wake up and you're like, I'm not gay anymore. I'm not attracted to men, like the one meme of the guy. And then you kind of like wake up by mid-afternoon, like, oh shit, like kind of like the 3 years reset by now. But I don't like men's no more. And so you spend a chunk of your life, a chunk of your savings, a lot of your psychology and your well-being sacrificing to in this document. The goal is to address the emotional conflict that has been uncovered in the evaluation. So they're setting up the fact that like we will figure out why you're gay. It's really easy. And then they continue. This process involves resolving anger with those who have inflicted hurt, not other people apologizing, just you forgiving people through an ongoing forgiving process, strengthening male confidence. And so they have all of these wacky ass things about like dress more masculine and then go do this exercise where you talk to random men on the street and go join a sports ball league and like learn how to throw a football and not look so sissy in the process, and resolving sadness and loneliness and building trust. So in this weird, like, I need to build male friends, but I also can't, like, it's kind of like a near occasion of sin. But like if I'm really masculine, once again, you're trying to go like masculinity and attraction. If they line up, then they're gone. And so you spend so much of your life, whether that's months or years or decades and potentially thousands of dollars for this false hope, when you could have just been out building a happy, healthy life. You could go on dates. You could accept yourself. You could live a normal life where you're not waking up every day talking about how the fact that you couldn't throw a football in 3rd grade at recess is the reason why you're gay and can't have a vocation, or trying to talk about how the time that you were legitimately abused was the cause of you being gay. And so really it's kind of like God didn't make you gay. It's actually like somebody else's fault, but like, whoops, God was watching the whole time and knew you were going to end up gay. So it's kind of like your fault at the end of the day. There's all these things, and you read all of this shit, and your identity, your experience of the world is always lumped into all of these terrible things, and that kind of wears off on you as a while, and you realize, like, you internalize the fact that this paper on how to not be gay starts with the sexual abuse crisis. Somehow it's your fault. You are bad. You are broken. You are the issue here, and that's why there's so many terrible mental health outcomes in this whole endeavor, in my opinion, I should add, in case this goes to court one day. Yeah, so if one day we're in court, hi judge, that's awesome.
I will say, if you want a nice little summary, the last sentence of that last paragraph of that section just sort of sums it all up. It says, the Vatican directive states that the transitory same-sex attractions must be clearly overcome at least 3 years before diaconal ordination. Psychotherapy that primarily addresses weaknesses in male confidence in conjunction with spiritual direction usually makes this possible. Seminarians who have not overcome their SSA by the stipulated time should take a leave of absence and return when their confidence has grown and their attractions have resolved. So it's essentially literally saying, go get conversion therapy and then come back to become a priest. It'll usually work, and if it doesn't, take a leave of absence till it does, you know? And the very next section, they just have a little blurb that talks a bit about what you were just saying, because they say, in view of the crisis in the church marked primarily by homosexual acts against adolescent males, it is essential that mental health professionals involved in the evaluation of candidates for seminary or the treatment of seminarians with SSA should know how to distinguish deep-seated homosexuality from transitory same-sex attractions, understand the origins and treatment of it, and support the church's teaching on homosexuality. So essentially, they should all be doing conversion therapy on the seminarians is the takeaway of this paper by this guy who works for the same office that published the 2005 document.
And so this is where, if you heard the beginning of this, where like transitory same-sex attractions, it means you're unwilling to work on it. You're like, awesome. So our definition is transitory is just you're willing to work on it. You can go to seminary. Deep-seated really just means you kind of have this like addiction issue with it. Like you act on it, out on it. It takes up time in your life. But then all the other documents after they say like you can work on it are like, once you've completed and you're no longer gay, then you go off to seminary after 3 years. So the surface level reading is you can experience same-sex attraction, go to seminary, and then you read like a few paragraphs down and you're like, oh wait, like because I know that I can become straight, they're taking it for granted that you can become straight if you just go become a lumberjack and wear a flannel and get some giant biceps after some scoops of whey protein powder, and then somehow lead to your local Bible like men's group. Once you do that, obviously you're going to stop liking dick. So then you can go off to seminary. And so you start working on this, and then you get stuck in limbo. You get stuck in quicksand, and you will always have issues. There's always things you can think about in your childhood. There's always men that you admire, and you're like, I wish I was more like him. They're like, see, that's why you gay, boy. And then it's just like this weird thing where you're stuck in limbo. You're stuck in this therapist's office spending thousands of dollars, or you're stuck watching Joseph Chiambra blogs about random stuff. You get stuck in limbo. But you're like, deep-seated really just means that like I'm just not willing to work on it. But look at me. I'm writing a Joseph Chiambra blog. That's so awesome. The local rector is going to love that. And then you get stuck in limbo for forever. And so even though a surface level reading is like, oh, it's transitory, like you work on it, go to seminary, and you won't be gay if you love Jesus enough, it never happens.
And I will say, if anybody's watching this and has read To Save a Thousand Souls, Father Brannon's opinion on this is slightly different because he doesn't really talk too much about going to therapy and fixing yourself, for at least from what I remember. Actually, I have it in front of me.
Can you give a little context? What is To Save a Thousand Souls?
Well, it's this lovely book, and it's basically a guide for discerners who want to go into the seminary.
And it's used in almost every diocese in the U.S., most vocational directors. You can get a free copy. If you Google a free copy of To Save a Thousand Souls, the Catholic Church will ship you. They will pay for the book and pay to ship it to you. It's kind of the gold standard. Once again, for the apologists who've listened to One Catholic Answer show, like Save a Thousand Souls isn't an official document, but it's used in nearly every diocese, and nearly every discerner in the past 25 years or 20 years has read it. So even though it's technically not on the Vatican shitty website, that's a whole other story. So it's not official, but it's used. And so like in principle and in praxis aren't really a distinction. And so I get it if you're an apologist and you're Jello and I'm trying to nail you to the tree. Yeah, like the To Save a Thousand Souls isn't ex cathedra, but it is used in almost everybody's experience. This is a whole other rabbit hole as Ben's looking at the book. Like apologists will always like, God, I really hate that the church says this thing. That's so wrong. And then they'll go out like making shitty Catholic apologetic videos after that. It's like, this is your church. The church is still doing this. They're still printing copies of this shit. There's still kids who are 14, the local fraternity priest is berating them about how the fact that they're not masculine enough. Like this stuff is still happening, and you could do something except for vacuous apologies on the internet. Like there's things you could do. Anywho, back to the main point on To Save a Thousand Souls.
Yeah, he explores these questions. So he says, a person with deep-seated homosexual tendencies would identify as homosexual, under severe stress, may experience strong physical and sexual attractions to adult males and adolescents of the same sex. Interesting that he adds adolescents in there. Yikes. Engage in homosexual behavior, harbor excessive anger towards the church because of the teachings on sexual morality, refuse to defend the sacrament of marriage, have strong narcissistic conflicts, refuse to try to understand emotional conflicts which lead to SSA, defend the use of homosexual pornography, demonstrate excessive anger towards those who are faithful and loyal to the church's teaching on sexual morality. Again, this is so inconsistent. And yes, it's almost word for word. Yes. He doesn't really cite it though, I don't think, which
it's because all of these Catholics kind of copy paste language from each other. Like the gay Catholic priest discerning world is like, you could fit them all in a car together, and they all kind of just copy each other's phrases. And it's this weird shadowy network with this prominent people. But if anybody who's watched a lot of content on this, you're like, that's a really odd phrase, and that's a really odd phrase, and then everybody uses the same exact odd phrases, and you're like, oh, this is like one specific thing. This isn't like Joe Schmo from your parish council who doesn't have a functioning brain writing this stuff on the internet. Like this is a top down. They're all copying each other. They're all in some alignment, but they're also all so incredibly vague that they still leave this gray area. But it's like, so if I experience same-sex attraction, but I don't act on it, I love what Holy Mother Church has to say. I read the Green Catechism every day, like comics on the toilet, and I love the church. But like, I'm gay. Like, it's not changing. I tried. I spent $10,000 on some shitty therapist. Like, it's not going to change. But like, I love the Lord. Like, is that deep seated? Like, I don't support the gay culture. I'm not angry
They-
at the church. I
it
have good male
seems-
friends.
It's exactly. It seems completely up to your rector. And I will say, I have known, and several of us have known several priests who either hid or didn't really know that they were homosexual throughout their formation process. And what's interesting about them is that they really they're in a really weird rut, because there's another document, I forget which one it is.
Is that the 78
Uh,
one? But there's
I don't know,
to
but
your point,
it's
Ben, that these clerics are in this weird gray limbo zone where this is another point. Catholic priests will give talks about how much they love women, about their past relationships with women before discerning, about how they have dreams sometimes about having families, but they gave it all up for God. So, like, Catholic priests can publicly talk about the fact that they're attracted to women and do so in some very interesting ways, if you've ever listened to a number of Catholic conferences out there. But there is no prominent Catholic priest who talks about the fact that he is attracted to men, but is still celibate. There's a handful of news articles from random places in the world where priests have done this, but you are not allowed in normal life to mention in a homily the fact that you're attracted to men. Even if you're celibate, even if it's in the context of, and I gave all this up to become a priest for the Lord because I love the Eucharist and having my little hands ordained. Like, you can't talk about it. And then it's always held over your head. And like Ben said, we know a number of priests and seminarians, both current and former, who either fully disclosed or didn't disclose or partially disclosed the fact that they experienced same-sex attraction. And for the rest of their careers, and even up into this day, that's held over their head as this like secret that technically it's not sinful, except it's held over your head as a fact, like, if you ever step out of line, if you ever do anything else wrong, then you're out for this reason. So you have this giant like target on your head for the rest of your priesthood. It's always seen as a defect. It's never treated as this like, that's awesome, queen, like, slay, just don't fuck dudes. It's not allowed to talk about it publicly because it's shameful. That's the thing, that even though it's not sinful according to the catechism, it's still shameful.
Scandalizing.
It's broken. It's scandalizing.
It's scandalizing.
Because the church doesn't have a neutral ethic on this.
I mean, if you want, you can check this channel. Our most recent interview we did, he described a similar situation where he went through the seminary process and during the course of that disclosed his attractions, as you are supposed to during confession or whatever, if he was struggling with any of those sins, and was promptly told, oh yeah, you cannot be ordained, like, goodbye. That's happened to a number of seminarians that we knew. And conversely, we know multiple priests who they did confess certain things and were essentially told, just be celibate and it's fine. And so part of the reason I think people don't talk about it is because you're never sure if once you're open about experiencing these things, you might be losing your entire livelihood as a priest. Like, you might be, getting kicked out essentially. So there's a fear that keeps people from being honest about it. So even though we know that there's a disproportionately large number of gay priests, it's just not ever addressed or spoken about publicly, because the church has this sort of emphasis on preventing scandal for the faithful, and it's seen as something to be ashamed of, something intrinsically wrong that holy men of God should not be struggling with,
or to talk about in polite company at the very least. And this is especially for people that aren't familiar with the Catholic priesthood. If let's say you go to Bible college as a mainstream Christian, you get essentially certified as somebody who can lead a church, and you get fired from that job, like, you can go get hired at the next place. You can port your education with you. You can leave, you can work another career, and then you can come back. Or if you want to move to New York or something else, like, you can just move there and figure out a church that'll hire you there. Whereas in the Catholic Church, you spend 7 to 10 years of your life studying for a particular diocese, and you are at the whims of your bishop. He tells you where to live. He tells you what you can or cannot say. He sets a terrible salary for you. Like, there's all these things where it's very top down. And if you step out of line, you're shit out of luck for 10 years of work. Because unless that bishop releases you, or if you're not in good standing, you can't just go to New York and start another job. Like, the Catholic priesthood isn't a job in the same way that even like a Protestant pastorship job is. You have nothing, you own barely anything, you get paid basically nothing for all these years of work. And so you have to stay in line and follow everything that your bishop tells you. And so that's why it's this giant looming thing where it'd be the equivalent of, like, you have a house, but somebody could just steal that house out from underneath you. Even though you own the house, you've built the house can go out of the way, and that's always hanging over your head. And your particular bishop might say, it's fine, or your rector's like, it's fine. But a new rector comes in, a new bishop comes in, and you're screwed. So at any point, but if you're straight, it doesn't matter what you talk about in your past. You can talk about hookups, like you're fine, and no bishop's going to kick you out. But like as somebody who experiences same-sex attraction, whether transitory, deep-seated, whatever those things even mean, you are always at the whims of your bishop for this stuff. And that'll kind of lead us into our last document here, which is this is from Seal of the St. Louis Roman Catholic Theological Seminary. So once again, this isn't official church teaching. This isn't from the Vatican. This isn't in Italian, so it doesn't count. But this is called the Meeting the Challenges of Overcoming Transitory Same-Sex Attraction. Once again, overcoming conversion therapy. Thank you very much. And developing chastity in today's school of theology. This is written by a PhD, the director of psychology and counseling services at this seminary. So once again, this is from a seminary, and other seminaries are going to have different interpretations. But I think, once again, this gives us an accurate cross-section of the zeitgeist that's out there about how these things, how these are parsed out. And once again, slide 1 of text, the purpose of this tool is to specify how we operationalize and apply the document, instructions for concerning this 2005 document with the long-ass title, as it pertains to the advancements of men with transitory same-sex attraction and towards others. The process of overcoming transitory same-sex attraction will be facilitated by the student's ability to evidence significant growth in the following areas. So once again, everything's about, like, even if you experience same-sex attraction, you might be transitory as long as you keep working on it, because we know we're going to overcome it under this weird etiology. To master correct impulse management, growth in spiritual fatherhood, and celibate chastity. And there's a ton of slides that we can go through, but I don't know, Ben, if you want to walk us through a few select things where they have a point and like very specific guidelines of what some of these things mean, scrolling through here.
Well, just to, like, I mean, this clearly is directly from that document that we should try. Like, clearly the all of these points are, and that's why I looked really hard for that document, because I was like, man, there has to be something that they're all referencing, because it seems that, like, again, like what we said, it seems like they're all kind of pulling from the same thing. Yeah. And so recognizing and understanding the origin of the SSA label is such like deep code for, like, I met trauma. Like, you know, it's
you're gay because of trauma. Let's find the trauma.
Yeah.
We'll get rid of it, and then you'll be straight. That's the idea.
Yeah, and it also this constant emphasis on finding wounds of shame and sadness. I don't think I've ever met a man in my entire life who has not been emasculated, bullied, abused. I've never met a straight man who hasn't experienced those things. So this idea that, like, this is consistently being pushed as a causal factor for these seminarians' same-sex attraction, it's just completely, like, there's no consistent evidence for this. And I really wish that there was a way that we could, like, peer into, like, a seminarian's, like, therapy session, like, just to see, like, what is exactly being said, because it feels like, to me, this has to just be kind of the tip of the iceberg. Well, I know from experience this kind of language is just the tip of the iceberg of mistreatment. And so this worksheet is kind of just an example, I guess, of, like, how this document was implemented and used in ways so that rectors can effectively discriminate against perfectly faithful, like, young Catholic men who just, like, it's sad.
It's a very ongoing thing. Multiple priests and seminarians, former, current, have told us about being referred there essentially for conversion therapy. And they have a very similar approach of, we're just going to heal trauma. And if the sexuality resolves itself, well, isn't that wonderful? It's all about the trauma, you know? So it is very mainstream and very pervasive throughout the mental health care industry for clergy, as this idea that, you just have to go fix your same-sex attraction, you'll be fine. You know, this idea that you have to in some way be prepared and attempting to overcome it in some permanent sense is very much part of the ethic of all of these places. Even if it's not like your interpretation or your local bishop's interpretation of the document or church teaching, it is very much a large part of the culture around mental health care for priests and seminary admittance and all this stuff. Like, it is impossible to avoid. It is nearly universal, allegedly.
And all of this stuff is not favored by any mainstream psychological association. No. This stuff never gets published in reputable psychological research magazines. None of this stuff is in the mainstream. And these people out there, like, these people are real psychologists. These people sue people over the fact that they admit what the mainstream psychological approach is. The APA, the DSM, all of these things. They sue people over the fact that you say, like, God, like, I'm pretty sure all of this is discredited in just a hunk of garbage. And they're like, no, we have this study. And you're like, where's the study published? And it's like, oh, I made a magazine to publish my own study. And you're like, that's crazy. You published yourself. Who would have thought? Like, that's wild. So this is all essentially discredited by mainstream institutions, but yet they're willing to go to court over this stuff. So in this worksheet, yeah.
I was going to say, you should scroll down. There's some interesting stuff if you scroll down.
So kind of one here on this is like seminarian. So this is same-sex attraction worksheet, guidelines, strategies, and approaches, copyrighted 2018, personal history and development of same-sex attraction. The seminarian will be able to discuss unresolved childhood issues, and the benchmark is accept the truth about one's past and be accurate. Point 2, a seminarian will be able to recognize his identity as a child of God. Pro tip, if somebody ever says, you're not blank, you're a beloved child of God, it means they're about to say something absolutely vapid. So recognize your identity as a child of God. Benchmark, demonstrate an accurate understanding of the dimensions of the male identity. First of all, that's a really kinky sentence that they should rephrase. The dimensions of the male identity. God, that's just... 3, the seminarian will be able to recognize and modify unhealthy cravings for male acceptance and approval. Benchmark, demonstrate an understanding of healthy and holy boundaries and relationships with others. And once again, this goes into the whole other rabbit hole that, like, as a gay man, you can't really have male friends because they're the occasion of sin, but also you can have female friends because it gives the appearance of the occasion of sin. But then you also have to have close male friends to, like, heal yourself. So you're kind of like in a permanent pickle, for lack of a better term.
Yeah,
Ben, do you want to read through the overviews
it's a contradiction.
Of the rest of these? Yeah.
Where was it you were looking at specifically, Ben? You said there was an interesting spot.
So I was looking at let's see exactly which.
First of all, this phrase, express his sexuality in chaste thoughts and actions, is a wild phrase.
Yeah.
Wild phrase.
Yeah.
How do we do kink without doing kink? Like, what? It's kind of, how do you express your sexuality in chaste thoughts? And, like, what does that mean?
Yeah. I'm trying to find where.
6, the seminarian will be able to recognize St. Joseph as a chaste, loving, and affirming father and role model. Which, first of all, that'd be based if St. Joseph was affirming and kind of like showed up at a pride parade into your wedding. Like, I like the idea that St. Joseph is affirming.
Again, this is directly from that paper, the St. Joseph comment.
And demonstrate an understanding that his sexuality can draw him closer to God. Accept his sexual struggles as part of the sharing the cross. The cross is capital C capitalized, which is weird. Integrate his sexual and spiritual identity into a deepening relationship in each person of the Trinity with Mary and the communion of saints. So you gotta, like, offer up the fact that you're attracted to somebody else, to, like, Saint so-and-so of the such and such thing, which is like, amen, slay. Well, like, we've got to
Saint so-and-so of the such and such thing.
Of the blessed. It's like you have to offer up, like, each of your crushes to a different saint. Like, Saint Dominic's the patron saint of the fact that I love Kevin down the hallway. That's crazy. And each person, the Trinity, as if, like, is the approach of the Holy Spirit can be different than that of Jesus to you being gay? Which is,
this is actually what I was looking at. This self-labeling thing. I just, like, and also the reference is not a psychological document. It's a document about pastoral care. This, like, again, there's no significant references for these things. And these are, like, maybe we should articulate why we care so much. 1, because we've been through this. And 2, we know a lot of people who have been through
are
currently going through this.
Yeah.
And also the fact that this is just, like, it's such a big thing that nobody is talking about. Like, I've never seen anybody talk about seminary psychologists, like, encouraging seminarians to go to conversion therapy. Like, I've never heard anybody talking about this. And so it's
because it's
this
shameful.
Might all seem,
it's shameful. You can't talk about it in polite company, even though there's, at any given time, tens of thousands of men in seminary. And statistically, half of them to 75% of them are trying to figure this out. Except, and so we're talking about tens of thousands of people who are currently looking at this. And this isn't just like, God, I got to learn how to tie my shoe before I go off to seminary, like quick tutorial. Like, this is integral for your experience of your faith, of your community, of your psychologist, of the people that you look up to, of your career. And this stuff never goes away. And there are people, it is my own experience. When I was looking at these documents, discerning, I read all of these documents, I read all of the blogs, and the only resources out there are shitty ones that make you want to die. Like, those are the only things out there. And it's not like this is a small niche issue. Like, what do you do if you're a redhead and left-handed going into seminary? Like, I'd get it if there's not a lot of content out there. But this is tens of thousands of people. This is, and all this is around shame. And you have an infinite rabbit hole of taking up your entire psyche and every waking moment talking to your spiritual director about the fact that you're gay and how to cure it and all these things, when you could just not. You could just stop trying to shame yourself. You could stop trying to shame other people. You could stop trying to dig up other people's personal trauma and their issues with their friends. You could just shut up and let people live their lives. And because if you can just move on, the Catholic Church is always big about this, like, oh, it's not your identity, it's just your experience. Except your experience takes up all of your time. And I've found once I left the church, once I stopped realizing all these documents are pseudoscience and also complete shit, you stop thinking about being gay and you just live your life. Like, you just move on, you accept yourself, you live a normal day-to-day life, and this stuff doesn't weigh on you. You get to focus on other things. You get to focus on friends and fitness and going to college and your career and spirituality, and for some people, loving Jesus and finding a wonderful church. You get to focus on all of those things when you're not shamed into doing this by pseudoscience.
I will also say, I don't want to come across like we're the only way out of this is like, oh, leave the church and all that stuff. We may have our own personal opinions, but I think specifically with this issue about the seminarians, there is no reason, according to all of church teaching, that the Vatican couldn't release a new document that says, hey, you know what? Gay men can be priests. They just have to be celibate like everyone else. And you know what? That would be totally fine within church teaching, totally acceptable. It would help with the crisis in terms of how many priests they need. It would score them points with more liberal people. It wouldn't actually be changing any of their moral teachings about anything. This is purely an administrative rule.
And it's a completely new thing in the history of the church.
2005.
No, there's no document from like Irenaeus was not writing about like, well, if you are attracted to like, nobody was doing that. So this doesn't carry magisterial weight. This does not carry magisterial weight.
It's arbitrary.
They can change it.
I think the entire reason it exists is because they saw the abuse crisis and were like, oh, gay people are abusing people. We got to stop the gays from getting in, which is a completely homophobic and it's just unbelievable, frankly, that we're still dealing with this level of discourse in 2025. But there's nothing stopping them tomorrow issuing, hey, you know what? Gay people, you can become priests. Like, just same standards everyone else.
And even if they
wouldn't even be,
because they could clarify, like, you can experience same-sex attraction, but as long as you are celibate, as long as you are living out your vows, as long as everything else checks out, you're fine. But the documents don't lay that out. The documents could very clearly say, you can be attracted to men, but as long as you are celibate, just like the straight priests. Because the straight priests, there's no crazy documents about masculinity in view of your 5th grade recess.
Yes.
Like, that's not a thing out there.
No.
Like, those are things that you can work through as with the psychologist. Those are things, but they're not impediments. They're not phrased as things to be overcome before ordination. They don't give a 3-year time period on anything. The church could say, and it wouldn't change the catechism. It wouldn't change natural law. It wouldn't change the magisterium. It wouldn't change other thing other than they could stop, instead of this like weird language that's confusing and gets weaponized, they could say it clearly, same-sex attractions are not sinful. As long as you don't act out on them, you're fine. They could say that tomorrow.
They could. And honestly, when people talk about, there's so much in all of these documents, while they're doing all these harmful things, they surround it with this language of respect the dignity of the person, and we don't want to discriminate, and we love people, and we're trying not to discriminate. This rule is pure discrimination. There is no theological, moral, there's no reason for it beyond, well, gay people are gross, so we don't want them in our seminary, because that's like, are they really normal enough to be priests? Like, that's literally the only justification. I guess if we're going to have... Yeah. We're going to call on people or call for something specific, it's amend the 2005 document, please, and thank you immediately.
At least make an official statement clarifying that deeply seated means.
No, just, you know what? I'm tired of the word rabbit holes. Just say it plainly that gay people can be priests as long as they abide by the same rules as straight priests, because there's no reason not to. And yeah, anyway.
Because in the U.S. legal system, when it comes to like anti-discrimination, what they're looking for is like similarly situated is the operative term in a lot of legal cases, which is like if two people were in the same store shopping, one is white and one is black, and they got treated differently, now we're talking about discrimination, which is also how they look at differences in, let's say, sex, or kind of like different legal cases. But in this case, if we say, if a man who's attracted to women and a man who's attracted to men, if they are similarly situated, which is quite obvious that they are, just have the guidelines, which is don't break your vows. They could entirely get rid of the same-sex attraction language. They could get rid of this deeply seated, this transitory. They could get rid of all that language and just have the standards for everybody. They could do that. And then you wouldn't have these rabbit holes, and then young men going to visit the seminary because they've never really seen the outside world and grown up in a homeschool family, and this is like what they want to do with their life. And they get there and the rector's there starting conversion therapy from like meeting one. If there's a document that's like, hey, like you experience attractions and your attractions aren't your identity, to quote a Father Mike Schmidt's line, like your attractions aren't your identity. So then it should be fine of me going to seminary and offering my life up to the Lord. And like I said earlier, when you can get rid of all of this trying to shame people and going on fishing expeditions and spending all this money, and you still want to stay Catholic or Christian, that just gives you time to love Jesus, to go serve people. You can go feed homeless instead of reading these documents on the internet. You can go in prayer and help somebody give them last rites instead of trying to figure out what deeply seated means. You, instead of going to psychology for weird memories from when you were a kid, you could work on like, hey, like what's the anxiety that I'm working with now? Like there is so much in your life that you are freed up to do when you aren't being shamed by the hierarchy. You can start living a normal, happy, healthy life. You can still be fully in line with the church's other documents. They could just get rid of this.
It would also solve what we talked about earlier, which is a big problem for all gay men in Catholicism, which is that there's no path open to them in their life that is a lauded vocation. You know, it would sort of ease a little bit of the pressure on that sort of existential despair that a lot of Catholic gay people go through. And I also want to just say that we've met a lot of gay priests, current and former, and a lot of them are some of the most loving, kind, pastorally minded, responsible clergy that I've ever interacted with in my entire life. So this is something that I think even the most devout Catholics could get on board with. Like, guys, it would only improve the quality of your priests. It would only improve how your church is viewed in the secular world. It would only improve the lives of actual gay people who are Catholic. There's no downsides. It's just fighting homophobia and improving people's lives.
Yeah, and so I think that kind of brings us to the end of our discussion, which kind of the recap of all of this is the Italian Bishops' Conference is reported as changing church teaching. What they did is add some flowery language about the dignity of the human person. They still, at the bottom, included the same language from the 2005 document, which distinguishes between transitory and deep-seated homosexual attractions or tendencies. And those things are arbitrary at best and weaponized at worst, that people have a broad interpretation of what they mean. And these interpretations of psychological or pseudopsychological terms are made by unlicensed people in unprofessional ways that perpetuate harm. And this could all be changed. This could all be clarified because everybody has an interpretation. The church could clarify. The church could take concrete steps to end actual unjust discrimination, as they say, without having to change their essential core teaching on everything. They could change this and you can still keep your no gay marriage. You can still keep your no abortion stuff. That's a whole other conversation. But technically speaking, allowing men who experience same-sex attraction to be full participating members of the priesthood isn't going to affect those other issues.
Absolutely.
So, that brings us to the end of the episode, unless Colin or Ben, you had any other final thoughts?
Change the document.
That's really simple. Just go into WordPress.
Literally, go into that terrible website.
Yeah. It can't be that hard to edit the Vatican site.
HTML.
But make PDFs available.
Oh, there's that.
Papa, make them available.
Or make like a basic WordPress template for the Vatican website.
I'm tired of looking at the fake papyrus backgrounds on these documents.
Yeah.
Anyway,
in and this is a complex topic. Everybody has a lot of different thoughts on this. There's a lot of interpretations, and somebody down below in the comments is going to go, no, I figured out this is what this means. And the answer is like, great, okay. You figure out an interpretation, and so does Father so-and-so, and so does Sister so-and-so, and so does Bishop so-and-so.
I cannot wait. I cannot wait for somebody to be like,
That's not what the church teaches.
Yeah.
we literally
the
read
other
the
option-
document.
Or the other option is you just admit the fact that you see same-sex attraction as bad, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the other thing.
Totally.
Is like there will be people down in the comment section who's like, no, the church couldn't do that because having attractions to men is bad and not good and the sign of brokenness. But the church kind of like has this middle ground where they're like, yay, it's bad and also not bad. Yay, they're kind of in the middle. So it's like either go like if the church teaching really is that same-sex attractions aren't sinful and homosexuals shouldn't be discriminated against, then do that. Or if at the end of the day you're still like same-sex attractions, it's bad, it's broken, it's something to be overcome, just come out and admit that, right? And so the comment section is either going to be people who didn't read the first part or watch the first part, which is there's a lot of interpretations, and you as a lay person, it doesn't matter because there's other interpretations. Or they're going to go the one of two directions, which is, yeah, the church should change the documents, or the church should not admit these people and just be okay with that. So that's kind of like your heuristic through which to view the comment section is either one, they didn't watch the video, or two, they're going one of the two extremes is really the only way you can kind of go from here. And then this is important.
Or they're going to flirt with Colin.
That's true. Viking transformation. Comment sections are wild on these videos.
Anyway, I think we need to end. We are rambling now.
And so this is an integral issue. And if you're a straight person out there watching, it's like, these documents, like whatever, and you move on with your life. Like these are documents that gay men will read every week of their life for the rest of their discernment for years on end. These are documents that rectors will read. This is an ongoing issue that will continue to happen, that harm will continue to be perpetuated, and that if you don't understand what the emotions around this are, I just encourage you to just bite your lip on this issue. There's so many other things you can argue with ex-Catholics on. There are so many other things you can do besides like speak into a situation that you have no clue about from people who have spent more time on this issue and have prayed and loved Jesus more than you. Like, I would encourage you, like, if you don't know what this experience is like, that's okay. But move on and let's have a good discussion with people who know what this is like, because this is integral to so many Catholics understanding themselves in the church, that the church is a wide and a varied body, and there's other things that you can talk about. And if somebody's listening and you're doing reporting on this issue or want to go further into it, you can reach out to me. You can reach out to any of my co-hosts. This is an infinite rabbit hole. All these issues are connected. So whether it's my YouTube channel or our other podcast episodes or talking to any of us one-on-one, we'd love to chat. This is a really big issue that the church needs to decide on, and we're happy to chat about that. And if you want to talk to us, you can also join our Discord server. This is where I transitioned to plugging my Patreon that makes hour-and-a-half long conversations like this possible. If you think this is an issue that needs to be talked about, that needs to be brought to the forefront, or you just want to talk to other people about this issue, I encourage you, if you're financially able, to join my Patreon, to join my Discord server. Great conversations about these issues with people who've gone through it. I'd love to see you guys there. And if there's other questions or other topics, leave them down below in the comments, and we have plenty of more space that we can have future conversations about this. So that wraps up our conversation on this issue. Hopefully, if you're walking and listening to this as a podcast, you had a great walk or a great workout or a great car ride, or if you just had lunch while you're listening to this, like I watch YouTube, I hope your lunch was amazing. Whatever you were doing while you were listening to this, thank you for listening to all of us talk about these issues, and we will see you in the next episode.